From my early years, I was enchanted by the allure of storytelling. The instant I gripped a pen, the outside world disappeared, leaving only me and the paper. As I grew older, this passion flourished, turning writing into a sanctuary where I could process life's complexities. Meeting Emily was a game changer. She was everything I had ever imagined and more. Our love story felt like a classic novel, bursting with happiness, laughter, and the occasional sorrow we always managed to overcome. We built a life, a family, and created memories that I believed were eternal. But life had its unpredictable twists, shattering my expectations. My daughter visited me today, but the encounter was far from pleasant. Despite her genuine efforts, the years of estrangement and deep-seated pain made it hard for me to reciprocate her warmth. She spoke softly, left without the reconnection she yearned for. I promised to think it over, but once she left, I was overwhelmed with tears. Ellie, now with her own family, still reminds me of the little girl I used to hold. She's brilliant, eloquent, and beautiful, a fantastic wife and mother, much like her mother in both looks and tenacity. She's everything a parent could wish for. So why had I avoided her until now? The rift began 5 years ago, rooted in her mother's actions. The last words I spoke to Ellie were at her mother's funeral. Overcome with grief, I told her she was as dead to me as her mother. I did the same to my son, David, making my feelings clear to everyone present. Their shocked and pained faces haunt me to this day. I walked away, holding my youngest daughter, Laura, by the hand. Falling for Emily was instant. It felt as if we had always been together. Our love was perfect, like chocolate and strawberries. Even before we married, people said we looked like a couple who had been together forever. We tied the knot after college and had just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. Our 25th anniversary was a grand event on a bright July afternoon, surrounded by family and friends. My father sat at the head table with Emily's parents and our 3 children. Friends and neighbors congratulated us, showering us with gifts. Even the mayor gave us a proclamation declaring July 10th as Emily and James Parker Day. Over 200 people gathered under a massive tent, laughing, eating, and dancing late into the night. During our vow renewal, tears flowed freely. I was entirely focused on Emily, the woman who completed me and whom I loved deeply. I didn't notice anyone else around us, not even our children or our golden retriever, Rusty. Our eldest daughter, Ellie, had just returned from her honeymoon. David had finished his 2nd year of college and Laura her 1st. It was wonderful to have the whole family back home. I secretly missed the chaos of having the kids around, and I think Emily did too. We felt like a complete family again. A few days after the celebration, I was returning some rented equipment when I slightly damaged my truck's fender. At home, I turned too sharply and hit the headlight of a new BMW. The officer who responded, Mike, had grown up with David and played on his sports teams. Now taller and authoritative in his uniform, Mike made me proud, just like my own kids. After finishing the paperwork, Mike and I chatted. Our conversation ended with a comment that planted a seed of doubt in my mind. "Well, Mr. Parker," Mike said, extending his hand, "I need to get back to the station. It was nice seeing you again. Sorry I missed your anniversary party. My parents said it was fantastic." We shook hands, and I felt proud of the man he'd become. "Oh, and tell Mrs. Parker to stop at stop signs from now on," he added with a grin. "Next time, it won't just be a warning." My puzzled look must have given me away. "Oops, I didn't mean to say that," he stammered, embarrassed. I tried to ease his discomfort while figuring out what he meant. "It's okay, Mike. Emily doesn't always tell me about her tickets. She thinks I'll get mad and take away her driving privileges. I won't, but I let her think that for some leverage at dinner. What was the ticket for? I might tease her about it." "Sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned it. It's really no big deal, just some friendly teasing. What happened on Saturday the 15th? Your wife turned onto Maple Street from the Marriott without stopping at the sign. She didn't hit anyone, but she accelerated quickly, so I had to pull her over and give her a warning for missing the stop sign. No harm done." "Mike, you did the right thing. I'll remind her to watch her driving and tease her a bit. Thanks, it was nice seeing you." After unloading the chairs and tables, I sat in the truck mulling over my conversation with Mike. On the 15th, I was at my dad's house, helping him with chores. It was 2 weeks after Ellie's wedding. I remember taking Dad to tour a senior home, though he wasn't interested. I spent all Saturday with him and got home late Sunday. Emily didn't mention the ticket, just said she had a quiet afternoon reading. I dismissed Mike's comment as a mistake since Emily wouldn't lie to me. A month after the party, my sister called, saying she found Dad on his kitchen floor. He'd fallen but wasn't hurt, just confused. I planned to visit that Saturday and convince him to move somewhere with more help. Maybe this time he'd listen, but probably not. He's stubborn. With David and Laura home for the summer, I insisted they come with me, playing the guilt card. You haven't seen Grandpa in a while, and he won't be around forever. I told my teenagers about the planned visit to their grandfather, and they hesitantly agreed. Laura said she'd relish the quiet time to finish her thriller novel. During the drive, David talked about a girl from his art class, and Ellie mentioned she was determined to concentrate on her studies without any distractions. We discussed their plans, and I ended up sharing yet again the story of how their mom and I first met. Grandpa was overjoyed to see the kids, more animated than I'd seen him in years. We had brunch, shared stories, and enjoyed the morning together. By midday, he dozed off, so we decided to let him rest. "Hey, keep an eye on Grandpa for a bit. I need to grab something to take down that dead tree in the backyard," I said. David and Ellie stayed in the living room, half watching TV, half watching Grandpa. I intended to get the chainsaw and ropes from home, but got sidetracked. I turned off Maple Avenue onto Sycamore Street and, without thinking, pulled into the parking lot of the local coffee shop, Brewed Awakenings. I noticed the stop sign Emily had mentioned she almost missed, realizing how easily it could happen. As I circled the lot, I spotted a car that shouldn't have been there, Emily's red Ford Escape with her distinctive Lit Lover decal. I got out, peeked inside, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. The doors were locked. Curious, I called home and got the answering machine, then I called her cell. "Hey, honey, where are you?" she asked brightly. I fibbed. "Oh, just running some errands for Dad and thought I'd call. I tried the house, but no answer. Where are you?" "I'm at the shopping center, finished my book and thought I'd do a bit of shopping. Is that okay?" she replied. Wow, she just lied to me, I thought. "No problem. Just don't go overboard." "When will you be back?" I asked. "Around 6. Do you want me to pick up something for dinner?" she offered. "No, I'm not feeling great. I might stay at Dad's tonight and send the kids home. I'll let you know," I said. "Okay, call me when you decide," she said. "Are you alone?" I questioned. "Yes, just me. Why do you ask?" she replied. "Just curious. Enjoy your time and watch out for Officer Mike at the stop sign by Brewed Awakenings," I warned. "Will do." "Bye," she said. After hanging up, I heard a faint scream from the direction of the hotel next door, but saw nothing. I waited by Emily's car, and a few minutes later a police car pulled up. Mike got out. "Hey, Mr. Parker, did you call emergency?" Mike asked. "No, I didn't," I replied. "Someone reported a disturbance. I better check it out," Mike said. "Mike, can you do me a favor?" I asked. "Sure, Mr. Parker. What do you need?" he responded. "Could you check if Emily is here and who she's with?" "I'll wait over there," I requested. "Absolutely, Mr. Parker. I'll let you know what I find," Mike assured before heading to the entrance. After a long wait, I heard sirens and saw an ambulance arrive. They loaded someone inside. Mike returned, looking grim. "I'm sorry, Mr. Parker. Your wife tried to run through a glass door and got hurt. She's at Mercy Hospital, bruised and hysterical. The man with her left when the ambulance did. I have his details, but you'll need to fill out a form at the station to get them. I'm very sorry." He extended his hand, but I was too stunned to respond. After he left, I collapsed against the car, overwhelmed. Somehow, I managed to drive back to my dad's house, standing in the driveway, dazed. Ellie saw me and rushed outside. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked. I couldn't speak, and she started crying when she saw me break down. When David came out, I told them their mom was in the hospital and they should go help her. I didn't explain further, but they quickly got in the car. I tossed the keys to David, saying, "I'm staying here tonight." They looked confused, but drove off. I made sure Dad was okay, then collapsed on the couch, unable to process everything. Dad rolled over and sat next to me. "What's happened, James?" he asked. We rarely talked about personal matters, so I stayed silent, expecting a reprimand. Instead, he said, "When you were little, I made a big mistake at work, took something I shouldn't have. I got caught, repaid the money, and was put on probation. Your mom was furious and heartbroken. It took a long time to rebuild our trust. One day, she found me a new job lead, hugged me, and forgave me. From then on, I worked hard to be a better man for her. Maybe you need to find forgiveness or be forgiven like I did. I'm proud of you, James. I love you very much." He placed his hand on mine and prayed silently before leaving. I stayed on the couch as night fell, ignoring my ringing phone, feeling completely lost. The next morning, after making breakfast for Dad, I went into the backyard alone. Around noon, I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Hey, Dad, are you okay?" Ellie asked, her eyes red and puffy. I shook my head no, and she hugged me like she did when she was little, and we both cried. Eventually, she spoke. "Dad, Mom's okay physically. She has a concussion, stitches, and a broken nose, but she's emotionally shattered. The doctor gave her something to help her sleep, but she keeps waking up calling for you. David and I are with her. She keeps asking why you aren't there. She told us what happened, and I confronted her. I told her I couldn't forgive her and that I hated her." "Don't say you hate your mother," I interrupted angrily. "She loves you and you love her. She made a terrible mistake and I need time to figure out what to do." "Dad, she lied and betrayed us. She doesn't deserve our love," Ellie retorted. "It doesn't matter. She's your mother," I insisted. "But she's also my wife. Do I still love her after what she did?" Ellie asked. I was silent for a long time, trying to sort through my emotions. "I don't know. I'm still in shock. I need time to get my thoughts and feelings straight. Right now, it just hurts too much to think clearly." As I finally spoke, my voice cracked. "Laura, no matter what you decide, I'll support you. I love you," she said, her eyes filled with tears. We embraced, letting our emotions flow freely, and watched a hawk soar above the trees, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The weekend with Dad passed in a blur. I spoke briefly to Ellie and David on the phone, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to Emily. The pain was still too raw. By Monday, I called my boss and asked for an extended leave. For the next 3 days, I remained outside, drowning in my sorrow, with Laura constantly by my side, offering silent support. I thought about the 25 years Emily and I had shared. Our life wasn't perfect, but the good times far outweighed the bad. I didn't know all the details of her betrayal, and I didn't want to. What little I knew was already too much to bear. The sandwich Laura had made for me lay untouched next to a crumpled napkin. Days had passed since my world fell apart, and my mind was still a chaotic mess. "James," a voice called out, pulling me from my thoughts. Without turning, I muttered, "Hi, Emily." She sat down across from me, and I saw she looked worse than I felt. "James, I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. Her face was marred with bruises and bandages. She looked terrible, and my broken heart made her seem even more pitiful. "James, I came to apologize. I know it's not enough, but it's all I have. Ellie drove me because I can't drive myself. I needed to see you to explain what I did. It was my fault, not yours. You didn't deserve any of it. I hurt myself as much as I hurt you. I might have destroyed something more precious than life itself." "I need to explain," she began. "No, I don't want to hear it. Knowing what I know is already tearing me apart inside. Don't say anything more," I interrupted. "But James, if you understand why I was weak, maybe you could forgive me," she pleaded. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want to hear it," I shouted. "Please, James, we can heal and be a family again. Just listen," she begged. I said no, I repeated, standing up and walking away, leaving her in tears. "Dad, please listen to her," Ellie said, catching me in the kitchen. "She needs you to listen and forgive her." I turned to Ellie and said, "If you think listening to her will help, you're as deluded as she is. If she needs to soothe her conscience, let her write a letter." I can't listen to her excuses for destroying our 25-year marriage. I don't have the strength to forgive her right now. I got in my car and drove aimlessly, not knowing where I was going or if I would return. The next day, when I returned to Dad's, Laura greeted me with a smile and a hug. Her smile reminded me that there was still happiness in the world, giving me a sliver of hope, but it didn't help me decide if my actions would bring joy to anyone else. Dad, I've decided to move in with you for a while. I need some time away, and you need help with cooking and cleaning. Believe me, Dad, I've tasted your cooking, and you need more than just eggs and bacon, Laura said. Can you help me get some things from home? I can't go there while Mom's there, and I need work stuff too. Tell everyone I'm living here until I find a permanent solution. Just say Mom and I are separated. No details, okay, Dad? I'll get your list tonight. Should I tell Mom anything? I asked. Just tell her I'm living here and she doesn't need to call. I'll call when I'm ready, Laura replied. I gave Laura my list and discussed our new living arrangements with Dad. He seemed glad I was coming home, but sad about the circumstances. We even played chess, something we hadn't done in years. He won, of course. When Laura returned with my things, the car was packed. I brought my stuff too, she said firmly. I'll stay in the guest bedroom until school starts. Her determined look showed she was serious. Later, I asked her what happened. Laura's face twisted in anger. Can you believe Ellie and David? Ellie said you're being childish and should reconcile with Mom. David said everyone cheats and you should forgive her and get a girlfriend on the side. They're wrong, Dad. You haven't done anything wrong, but everyone's blaming you. Mom destroyed everything and doesn't deserve forgiveness. That's why I'm here. They think you're wrong for not apologizing and going back. I couldn't stand it, so I packed my stuff and left. Laura was furious, and once her mind was made up, there was no changing it. I let her vent her anger in silence. For the next 2 months, I tried to live normally. I went to work, helped around the house, and taught Laura to make lasagna. Ellie and David called every few days, asking when I was coming home. I imagined Emily behind them, waiting for my answer. I told them I was staying with Dad and didn't want to talk about or to Emily. When they pushed, I hung up. One day, David showed up and said he had something important to tell me. We went to the backyard and sat on the porch. He could say what he needed to say. Dad, you need to come home. It's been 2 months, and Mom is worse. I have to go back to school soon, and I can't leave Ellie alone with her. Mom cries all the time, doesn't sleep or eat, and has lost a lot of weight. Friends are worried too. She just stays home and cries when we suggest going out. You've punished her enough. You need to get over this and come home. She's sorry you're hurt, and she's hurt. Come home. I stood on the balcony of my city apartment, the skyline a blur of neon lights and towering structures. My son David entered the room, his expression a mixture of frustration and desperation. This wasn't the boy I had taken to the park, or the young man I had helped navigate his first career steps. This was someone I barely recognized, a man defending his mother's betrayal. Dad, you need to move forward, David insisted, his voice tinged with urgency. Mom made a mistake, but she's still family. David, you're an adult now, so let's speak plainly. Leave this apartment. How dare you suggest I'm the one being unreasonable? I'm not the one who shattered our family. If you think what your mother did is forgivable, then you've lost your moral compass. Go back to her. I'll be here figuring things out. Now get out before I lose my temper. I turned away, my heart pounding. A few minutes later, I heard the door slam and David's footsteps echo down the hallway. Laura moved to Los Angeles in late August, and I hadn't heard from Ellie or David since. I assumed David was back at his university, and Ellie was managing her new job while trying to support Emily. They didn't call. It was just Dad and me now. In mid-September, I received an email from Emily. I tried to read it, but had to close my laptop. My emotions were too raw. I had told Ellie that Emily should write to clear her conscience, but now that I had it, I couldn't bear to read it. The wound was still too fresh. Instead, I ignored it and tried to move on with my life. Laura called every few days to check on Dad and me. She said Ellie and David were taking care of their mother. Laura planned a visit for my birthday at the end of October, and hoped I had made a decision about my future. Sitting in uncertainty wasn't helping anyone. I told her we would talk on October 30th. I turned 50 and finally made my decision. Laura arrived that morning with plans to take Dad and me out for a big seafood dinner. She wanted to show me what real New England clam chowder tasted like. I smiled, probably for the first time in months. We returned late from the restaurant. After settling Dad into bed, I joined Laura in the living room with a glass of scotch. "So, Dad, can you tell me what you've decided?" Laura asked directly. Sighing, I began, "I've decided that I don't know everything, including why she did what she did. My stubbornness and refusal to talk won't solve anything. I read her email, and while I'm not sure I believe everything, I need to give her a chance to explain. Reconciliation seems unlikely, but we need to talk. If I don't believe her, I'll file for divorce." We were both miserable apart. "I'll meet with her and see where we stand. I'll call her tomorrow." Laura's phone buzzed, interrupting me. "It's Ellie," she said, and stepped onto the balcony. She returned 5 minutes later, pale and wide-eyed, and threw herself into my arms, sobbing. "Dad, Mom's dead! Ellie found her in the bathroom. It looks like she overdosed on her medication. Ellie didn't say anything else." I couldn't process it. Emily was dead. Arranging the funeral for the woman I had loved for 25 years, the mother of my children who had betrayed me, was overwhelming. I tried to appear strong for the kids, but they knew I was barely holding on. In the evenings, I sat on the balcony, looking at the city below, remembering Ellie, David, and Laura playing in the park, being chased by their mother. I looked at the photo albums Emily and I had created over the years, remembering the good times, the gatherings, and the moments we shared. Having her in my life made me feel whole. Now I felt hollow and lost. I had a lot of unresolved feelings, especially about my role in Emily's despair. I didn't put the pills in her hands, but my refusal to talk to her contributed to her pain. I wanted her to feel my anguish because I loved her so much. She did the one thing that could destroy me, and now I may have destroyed her. I never wanted her to die, just to understand my hurt. Now I'll never know. She ruined our marriage, and I ruined hers. We were both wrong. May God have mercy on our souls. Tomorrow is Emily's funeral, my last chance to see her. I needed to control my emotions, face our friends and family, and say goodbye without breaking down. As I heard a car horn from the street below, Ellie approached me from the balcony door. "Dad, are you okay?" Ellie whispered, settling into a chair across from me. "No, not really," I admitted. We sat in silence, listening to the hum of the city. Ellie broke the silence. "None of this would have happened if you had come home and forgiven her. She made a mistake. You've probably made mistakes she forgave. She said she couldn't live without you. Your pride destroyed her." Stunned, I sat with my mouth open. My own daughter blamed me for my wife's death. I hadn't had an affair or lied to friends and family. I didn't take pills to ease guilt. Ellie continued, "Tomorrow will be tough. Everyone is invited to the apartment afterward. There will be a lot of people. You don't have to do anything or even be here if you don't want to. David and Mom's friends will handle the food, so you don't have to worry." Ellie didn't want me at the funeral. Maybe I was too emotional and stressed to understand her correctly, but I didn't want a confrontation with my daughter before her mother's funeral. I went inside and down to the guest room where I slept. The next morning I dressed in a suit and tie. The kids were already ready in the living room. Laura fixed my tie like her mother used to. Then we walked to the waiting town car, her hand in mine. She was silent, head down. At the funeral home, friends crowded the foyer. They parted as we entered the viewing room, but their expressions confused me. There was no pity, only disdain and contempt. Few made eye contact. I stood at the edge of a foggy pier, the smell of salt water filling the air. My childhood friend Leo approached me, his face lined with concern. He shook my hand and said, "I'm sorry," but others glared at him with disdain. My children received sympathy, but I was bewildered. My experience with funerals was limited, and this one was unlike any I had attended before. Laura and I knelt by the casket as a mournful harmonica played, but I heard whispers behind us. "Unforgiving beast. He deserted her. It's his fault, hypocrite. He drove her to this. Laura squeezed my hand, having heard it too. The chaplain's words were meant to be comforting, and Emily's co-worker sang a sorrowful, contemporary hymn that Emily adored. She shook hands with Ellie and David, but ignored me and Laura. Several friends spoke, and Ellie was the last. She talked about forgiveness, compassion, and how Jesus forgave those who wronged him. Listening to her, I finally understood the depth of their resentment. When we arrived at the burial site, the lighthouse cast eerie beams through the fog as we listened to the chaplain's final words. At the end, he gave each of us a small shell to place on the casket. I went first, followed by Laura, Ellie, and David. Dad's old friend helped him pass the casket. It was one of the most emotional days of my life. Before we left the grave, I stopped Ellie and David. With all the anger I felt, I said, "Ellie, David, I know what you did, and I've made a decision. Because of your actions and the way you defended your mother, making me look like the villain, you are both dead to me, just like the woman we buried today. Don't speak to me. Don't come to my house. Don't socialize with me. I am no longer your father." I then addressed the gathering. That includes all of you. Shocked by my hostility, I took Laura's hand and walked to the car. We left with my father in his wheelchair, leaving Ellie and David behind. Only Leo, his wife, and 2 old friends attended the funeral. They, along with Laura, were all the friends I had left. Ellie and David went to her house for comfort. Laura later told me that everyone believed I pushed Emily to self-destruction by refusing to forgive her. Laura returned to her studies, leaving me alone and friendless. When she came home between semesters and during breaks, it brightened my gloomy life. Ellie stayed with her husband's family, and David returned to his job as an architect. I focused on work to cope with the pain, often waking up expecting Emily beside me or tormented by thoughts of her affair with Thomas, an old neighbor who even attended our 10th anniversary party. Over time, the pain became easier to bear. Ellie had a baby girl named Clara, and later a boy named James. I never saw my grandchildren. David married his college sweetheart, but they divorced 2 years later after he cheated, adopting the same behavior he defended in his mother. He moved to Amsterdam, and I never saw him again after the funeral. Laura kept me informed about the family, slipping bits of information into conversations because, despite everything, they were still my children. Leo became my closest friend, supporting me through tough times and even giving me a year to get back on track, which motivated me to excel. 4 years later, I was promoted to regional manager in New Mexico. I sold my house, moved to Santa Fe, and began managing the Southwest Distribution Center. I also got another golden retriever for Buddy. Now all 3 of us were happy in New Mexico. Most of my friends deserted me, leaving me isolated. Laura graduated with honors and landed a management position in New Mexico, living with me until she found her own place. Dad died a year after Emily. It's been 5 years since my life changed and I lost everything except Laura. But even she wants to build her own life. I needed a purpose to avoid becoming a lonely old man with only my dog for company. I rediscovered my passion for writing, starting with short stories and selling a few to a local magazine. One weekend, I began outlining a story about a difficult time in my life, which turned into much more than a simple project. I hesitated, knowing it would dredge up painful memories, but eventually filled an entire notebook over 4 months. I didn't want anyone to see it, so I stored it away. The writing process itself was cathartic, helping me face and defeat my past demons, allowing me to live again. I enrolled in a creative writing class at the local community college to improve my skills. Most classmates were young and inexperienced, but I found camaraderie with 2 other seniors. Together, we aimed to show the youth of Santa Fe, New Mexico, the essence of good writing. Morris was retired and creating a series about his family's involvement in the civil rights movement. Alicia, a widow, was taking courses at the community college to keep her job and find new interests. She had raised 5 children as a stay-at-home mom and moved to New Mexico after her husband's death, using the insurance money to start fresh. Alicia and I found common ground quickly. I listened carefully to her, taking mental notes since I hadn't dated in nearly 30 years. One day she realized she was doing all the talking and asked about my background. I shared my story, and for the first time in years, I felt a connection beyond my immediate family. I summarized my background, but she wanted to know more. Eventually, I invited her to dinner at my place so I could share the full story. She accepted with a warm smile. "Dinner was incredible, James," Alicia said as we moved to the porch. "I rarely meet men who can cook such delicious lasagna. What other skills are you hiding?" "Well, you know most of it. I manage a logistics center in Santa Fe. My daughter Laura lives with me. My wife passed away over 5 years ago. I have 2 other children, and you've met my retrievers, Max and Daisy." "That's about it. Pretty boring," I replied. "You promised to tell me your story if I came to dinner, so I'm all ears," she encouraged. Instead of speaking, I brought out a box containing my manuscript. I've been writing for years and have sold a few short stories. This novel is about my family and me. Writing helped me process the pain from my wife's death and our family breaking apart. "I haven't shown it to anyone and would love your opinion," I explained. She looked at me with admiration. "I'd love to read it. What's it called?" she asked. "Echoes of Us," I answered. "Wow, it's hefty," she said, taking the book. 987 pages. I'll be honest with you. I haven't shown it to my daughter because it would bring up old wounds, I admitted. "James, I'd love to read it and give you my thoughts. I'm very particular and will be honest. I'll start tomorrow," she assured me. We talked about writing classes, the vibrant Santa Fe art scene, and shared opinions on our favorite movies. It was a wonderful evening, and for once the New Mexico weather was mild. As I walked her to her car, she kissed me on the cheek. I felt rejuvenated as I cleaned up after dinner. Alicia didn't attend class the next week, and I hadn't heard from her since our dinner. I began to worry if she had read my book and decided to avoid me. I considered calling her but didn't want to seem intrusive. 2 weeks later, she called while I was out and left a message on my answering machine. "Hi, James, it's Alicia. Please come to my house for dinner this Friday night. My son is visiting and I want you to meet him. I have a surprise for you. Bring a bottle or 2 of that fine white wine we had the other day and be here at 7 o'clock. Call me back to confirm. Bye." Friday night, I dressed casually but nicely and brought 2 bottles of 2012 Balazar Cabernet Hattenheim Schuttenhaus. I had read in a local magazine that it was one of the best wines of the year, and since I knew nothing about wines, I decided to trust the article's recommendation. It paired well with the lasagna, and I hoped it would pair well with whatever Alicia was serving. "Hi, James, come in." Alicia greeted me with a bright smile and gave me a tour of her house. When we stepped onto the patio, I saw a small table set for 3 with candles and wine glasses. A man appeared between 2 large potted plants. "James, this is my son, Barry. Barry, meet James Parker." "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said, shaking my hand. "Mom has said a lot of good things about you. She's impressed, and that's not easy to do." "It's nice to meet you too, Barry, but everything she's said is probably exaggerated from our writing class." "There's not much interesting about me," I replied. Alicia smiled and pointed to the table. She took the wine bottles and put them in the fridge while we sat down. When she finally joined us, she took my hand again. "James, I invited you here under a bit of a pretense. We'll eat once the wine is chilled, but first I have some amazing news to share. I think it will be a pleasant surprise." My curiosity was piqued, but I was also nervous. "James, my son came here today to meet you because I did something you might not have approved of if I had asked you beforehand. But now it's done, and I hope you're not upset. I finished your book in 2 days. It was captivating. I cried during the part where you moved in with your father after your wife's death. I cried again when you wrote about your children. It was the most powerful book I've ever read, and I had to share it with my son. He read it, and he usually doesn't read unsolicited books, but he did it for me. James, he loved it too, and wants to help you edit it for publication. Isn't that amazing?" I stared at her, stunned. I didn't know what to say. When I looked at Barry, he smiled and picked up where she left off. "Mom's right, Mr. Parker. This is the best first novel I've ever read. I work at Granite Press in New York. I'm an assistant managing editor, responsible for screening submissions. We get about 100 new books a month. I read and evaluate them before passing them to 2 other reviewers. If we all agree a book is worth publishing, we work with the author to edit and prepare it for publication. Your book has gone through this process and we want to publish it. We can discuss the details after dinner, but for now I want to congratulate you on creating such a moving story. It will be a real winner. I was utterly speechless. My face must have transitioned from shocked to completely flabbergasted in a matter of seconds. Alicia's smile widened as she watched me struggle to find words. Finally, she stood up, kissed me on the forehead, and went to prepare dinner. As she made the salad, I regained my ability to speak. We talked about my book, delving into its various chapters. Alicia teared up discussing certain parts, and I felt a lump in my throat, too. We enjoyed her version of mahi-mahi and savored sweet peach cobbler for dessert. Barry outlined the publishing process and what I needed to do, mentioning promotional efforts and potential royalties. By the time he dozed off, my head was spinning from all the new information. Alicia poured the last of the wine, and we sat together in the cool night breeze, fantasizing about being a famous author like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. I wasn't in their league, but it was fun to dream. It was past midnight when reality hit, and I decided it was time to go home. Alicia walked me to my car, and this time she gave me a deep kiss that touched my very soul. It reminded me that, even at 55, I wasn't dead yet. The thought of Emily crossed my mind, bringing a touch of sadness. For the next 3 months, I worked with an editor at Granite Press, revising and refining my manuscript. We had one in-person meeting and numerous emails and phone calls. The first task was transferring my MS Word document into the software they recommended. It was great for editing but cumbersome for creating new content. When we were finally satisfied with the manuscript, a printed proof arrived via FedEx overnight, and I spent the entire weekend meticulously reviewing it. No matter how many times I read it, there was always something to tweak. My editor had warned me this would happen, and she was right. I spent my days at the logistics center and my evenings on the novel. Laura was thrilled about my book, but had to wait for the first copy from the publisher before she could read it. She ensured I ate, exercised, and watched the evening news, acting like a protective mother hen. Alicia, on the other hand, only visited on weekends, claiming she didn't want to drain my creative energy. We'd dine out or cook at home, discussing everything under the sun. Her support was better than any therapy. The more I talked about my past, the better I felt. Apparently, I had never fully processed what had happened between Emily and me. I realized we both had our faults and were living in our separate narratives. Our friendship deepened, and the day I sent Granite Press my final edits, Alicia promised me a special reward. That night she stayed over, and we celebrated repeatedly. Laura came home briefly, noticed I had company, and left to stay with her boyfriend. Alicia opened up a new appreciation for life in me. My book hit the stores on May 1st. I was contractually obligated to do several in-person signings across the country, including one in Lake City, my old hometown in Maryland. The prospect both excited and terrified me. I took 3 weeks off work for the tour. Contrary to popular belief, an author's life isn't always glamorous. For 28 days straight, my routine involved flying or taking the train to a new city, checking into a hotel without unpacking, attending book signings, and talking to countless readers about how my book had impacted them. I enjoyed meeting fans, but the constant travel was exhausting. Alicia surprised me by showing up at 2 of my signings, bringing joy to my otherwise monotonous tour. She played the shy fan while I pretended to be a world-famous author seducing a local admirer. She stayed the night and helped me unwind from the travel-related aches and pains. Every time she left, I felt a void. Phone calls weren't the same as holding her in my arms. I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years, something only someone in love can understand. I hoped she felt the same way. The last stop on my tour was my old hometown. I had requested it to be the final stop, and Granite Press kindly obliged. I was familiar with the bookstore. It was only a few miles from my childhood home. The event was set to start at noon and end at 4 p.m. When I arrived, there was already a long line of people waiting in front of a table with about 50 copies of my book, a large poster featuring my photo, and an announcement of the signing time. Scanning the crowd, I recognized a few familiar faces. At the front of the line were my former boss and his wife. I hurried over to them, giving both a hug, before being signaled to start signing books. We exchanged phone numbers, addresses, and email addresses, and I promised to take them out to dinner when I returned. I was overjoyed to see them, almost forgetting about the growing line behind them. I signed books, chatted with them, and smiled at everyone in line. Occasionally, I got up to take a picture with someone. Overall, it was a much better experience than I anticipated. About 30 minutes in, an old friend approached me with a copy of my book. He had been one of those who avoided me at Emily's funeral. I signed his book, smiled, and gave him a friendly handshake. Then he did something unexpected. In a quiet voice, he said, "I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I didn't understand until I read your book." He then turned and walked away, shame evident in his demeanor. Similar apologies followed from several other former friends throughout the day. People I once considered friends apologized for their past judgments. I felt almost embarrassed by their contrition. The most surreal moment happened when Lenore Jablonski approached the table with a copy of my book to autograph. She had an awkward grin on her face. "Hi, James. It's strange seeing you again after everything, but I felt I should meet you and offer some sympathy. I can't apologize for what John did to you, but if it helps, I kicked him out shortly after Emily died. We've been divorced for 4 years, and I'm now engaged to a contractor from Annapolis. And just so you know, there was a rumor that you were looking for John to get revenge for the pain he caused. He must have believed it because he quit his job and moved to Saudi Arabia as a computer consultant. I haven't seen him since. Oh, and yes, I'm the one who started that rumor." She stood in front of the desk, smiling and holding out the book. I was at a loss for words. After a moment of silence, I took the book and signed it. "To Lenore, no fair-weather friend. I hope some of the words in my book help you find your peace as I have found mine. Thanks for listening. James." I walked around the table and we hugged briefly before she left. By the end of the scheduled time, there was still a line of people in front of the table. I looked up and was stunned to see Ellie standing by one of the book racks, observing everything. She didn't come over or say anything and had a subdued expression. When I looked up while signing the next book, she was gone. I got up and looked around, but she had already left. Last in line was Laura. We hugged and made small talk as she walked me to her car. She drove me back to my hotel, and no, it wasn't a Holiday Inn. We sat in the car for a long time, discussing Alicia. Laura liked her and hoped I did too. When I told her I thought I was in love with Alicia, she put her arms around me and sobbed on my shoulder. Just as she was hugging me, a police car appeared nearby and flashed its headlights. Police Sergeant Mike got out of the car and tapped on the window. As we all caught up, it felt like a mini reunion. We talked, laughed, hugged, and I told him about my book tour. He hadn't read my book, so I pulled out a copy and signed it for him. To Mike, meeting you changed my life. No offense, someone had to do it. James. Mike had to leave on business, and Laura and I headed back to the house for dinner. Returning to my hometown wasn't as traumatic as I had feared. The real shock came when Ellie appeared at my door. Alicia and I had just finished breakfast and were discussing the latest New York Times bestseller list, noting that Echoes of Us was ranked 3rd in the nonfiction category. All of that faded into the background when I saw my daughter. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" asked Ellie, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "Hi, Ellie. I'm fine. What can I do for you?" I replied. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see how you were doing," she said. "This neighborhood is 900 miles from yours, Ellie. That's quite a detour, isn't it?" I responded. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Alicia standing there. "Would you like to introduce me, James?" she said with a firm tone. "Alicia, this is my daughter Ellie," I introduced. Alicia squeezed past me and hugged Ellie tightly. "Come on in. I've heard so much about you." The two women completely ignored me as they made their way into the living room. They sat down and talked non-stop for an hour, leaving me to clean the kitchen and handle other household chores. I only passed by the living room a few times during the cleaning, and they chatted and giggled the whole time. Alicia oohed and awed when Ellie showed her pictures of her kids. "Honey, come out here and join us," Alicia called out. I immediately knew I needed to follow orders, so I came out and sat next to her. She grabbed my hand, more to keep me from leaving than as a sign of affection. Ellie stared at our intertwined fingers. The silence stretched longer than was comfortable. "Okay, since neither of you want to speak, I'll do it," Alicia said sternly. "James, I invited Ellie here because she has something to tell you. I knew you wouldn't invite her, so I did. I know I'm just a guest in your house, but if you want me to continue being a guest, you're going to sit here and listen to her." My gaze darted between Ellie and Alicia. They had me cornered, and I didn't want to start another argument, so I sat back and prepared myself. "Dad, I came to see how you were doing, and that's the truth. I also came to apologize. Dad, I was wrong about many things, especially about you. I thought everything that happened to Mom, Stuart, and me was your fault. I only saw part of what happened back then. Reading your book was eye-opening for me. It made me see things from your perspective. I felt so foolish after reading about your pain and realizing how deeply you were affected. Growing up, I never really thought about your feelings because you rarely showed them. Your book made me realize that even though I'm an adult with a family, I was still your little girl in your eyes. I always believed Mom was perfect, even after all the terrible things she did to you. You always appeared strong and unbothered, but now I understand that was just a front to shield your emotions. Mom shattered that shield and hurt you in ways I never imagined. I thought if you had just been strong and forgiven her, everything would have been fine. I didn't realize your true strength was in stepping away from the woman you loved for 25 years to protect us from her mistakes. Dad, I'm sorry for not giving you the credit you deserve. Instead, I abandoned you and blamed you for everything. After Mom died, I told people it was your fault. I was wrong, and I see that now. I've started to make amends. I bought copies of your book and gave them to all your and Mom's old friends, asking them to read it. I told them you were the one who suffered the most. I saw you at a book launch a few weeks ago, but didn't have the courage to approach you. Today, I'm here to apologize and ask you to be part of my life again. It's been over 5 years. You have 2 beautiful grandchildren you've never met. I want you to come home. I want you to be my father again. I don't want to be dead to you anymore. I love you, Dad, and I need you to love me again, please. Ellie lowered her head and began to cry. A wave of guilt washed over me. I glanced at Alicia, who was watching me intently, waiting for my reaction. I considered Ellie's words and how I should respond. To buy some time, I decided to ask about David. "What about David?" I asked Ellie. "How does he feel about me? Did he know you were coming here?" "David is a mess. What Mom did hurt him the most. After Lori caught him cheating and divorced him, he moved to California and started living recklessly. He's been jumping from one relationship to another. I heard he was dating a married woman whose husband opposed their relationship, so David left town to avoid trouble. He still thinks cheating is okay. He doesn't know I'm here, and I don't care what he thinks." Her outburst didn't give me enough time to think, so I decided to stall further. "Ellie, what are your plans now? Are you staying in town? Do you have a place to stay?" "I'm staying at Laura's. She wanted me to see her new apartment, so I'm here for a couple of days before heading home. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll think about everything you said today and let you know what I decide. That's the best I can do right now." "Dad, honestly, I didn't even expect this much. Thank you. I'm going to see Laura now. Alicia, it was nice to finally meet you. I hope to see you again soon. Take care of my dad for me." Ellie left as quickly as she had appeared. I had a lot to think about, but this time I had Alicia to help guide me. I couldn't imagine my life without her now. When we were alone, I let my emotions spill out. I didn't want Alicia to see me cry, but she comforted me anyway. When Alicia and I returned from our Caribbean cruise, we flew straight to Maryland. The cruise was a gift from Granite Press because Echoes of Us had hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. I met my 2 grandchildren, who are now 2 and 4 years old, and showed Alicia around town. There were many memories in the old place, and Ellie and I began to create new ones as father and daughter. Alicia, with her experience as a grandmother, gave me valuable advice to help me through the awkward moments. The best moment came at dinner with Ellie's family, when I announced that Alicia and I had decided to get married. We made this decision during the cruise and wanted to tell Ellie in person. Laura had already started planning the wedding. We were also going to visit Alicia's children to share the news. Alicia and I are very happy. We both said that when we were young, we never would have thought our lives would turn out this way. In our youthful naivety, we believed we were invincible and that our first true love would be our only love. But life didn't turn out like a fairy tale. It unfolded like millions of other real stories. I was happy with Emily for 25 years, and I expect to be just as happy with Alicia for the next 25 years. Maybe I'll write another book about it. Grow old with me, the best is yet to come. The last life for which the first was created, our times are in his hand. Who says I have conceived the whole? Youth shows but half. Trust God, see all, nor be afraid. Heck, Robert Browning was smart.